Family tree. During the 19th century, a term came into use to describe that common ancestor. It incorporated the notion that this was the original form of a language that was the source of modern languages in the Indian subcontinent and in Europe. With Proto-Indo-European established as some type of scholar set out to identify the branches of the Indo-European family tree, tracing the lineage of many modern languages. Indo-European is the language family with the largest population and distribution in the world, but it is not the only one. There are about 30 such language families containing more than 6,000 different individual languages. According to one reputable source, there are actually 6,912 languages in the world. In terms of number of speakers, Chinese has the most native speakers, about 1 billion, while English, about 315 million, is more widely used in different parts of the world. Looking at the Indo-European family tree, it might be puzzled initially by the idea that all these diverse languages are related. Two modern languages such as Italian and Hindi would seem to have nothing in common. For example, when using familiar letters to write out the words for father and brother in Sanskrit, Latin, and ancient Greek, some common features become apparent. While these forms have rather clear similarities, it is extremely unlikely that exactly the same words will be found throughout the languages. The close similarity occurs especially on the probable pronunciation of the words, is good evidence for proposing a family connection. The process we have just used to establish a possible family connection between different languages involves looking at what are called cognates. Within groups of related languages, it can often find close similarities in particular set of words. A cognate of a word in one language is a word in another language that has a similar form and is or was used with a similar meaning. For example, the English word of father, mother, and friend. On the basis of cognates, we would imagine that modern English and modern German probably have a common ancestor in what has been labeled the Germanic branch of Indo-European.
Comparative reconstruction is to reconstruct what must have been the original or protoform in the common ancestral language. First is majority principle. If in a cognate set, 3 words begin with a p sound, and 1 word begins with a p sound, then our best guess is that the majority have retained the original sound. The second is most natural development principle is based on certain types of sound change are very common, whereas others are extremely unlikely. There are 4 directions of most natural development principle. One is final vowels often disappear. For example, Fino became Fin. 2. Voiceless sounds become voiced, typically between vowels. 3. Stops become fricatives. 4. Consonants become voiceless at the end of words. Sound reconstruction. Start on comparative reconstruction by deciding what was the most likely form of the initial sound in the original source of all 3. This is example for sound reconstruction. In Italian, used initial sound k, and Spanish used initial sound k, but in French used initial sound sh. We start from Italian word cantare, in Spanish cantar, but in French they called chanter. The meaning is sing. According to one part of the most natural development principle, change tends to occur in the direction of stops language history and change becoming fricative. Word reconstruction. Here, I want to show you the example of word reconstruction based on Indo-European language. There are mube becoming mupe and mupe becoming mup. And the proto form of that, or the meaning in English, is stream. Based on the table, we can suggest that the older forms will most likely be based on language 2 or language 3. The history of English. Old English. The sources of Old English is from Germanic. A group of Northern European moved into the British. It's for about 5th century, or it is Angles, Saxons, and Jutes period were described as God's wrath toward Britain. People used Anglo-Saxons to describe this period. They used language to communication called Anglisk, and their region called Anglo-Land. After that, Christianity replaced Anglo-Saxons period on 7th until 8th century, and the Old English is closed by Vikings period. They came first to plunder and to settle in coastal of Britain in 8th until 10th century. Middle English. Norman French came to England in 1066. French is the main language of the nobility, the government, the law, and civilists in England for 200 years, but not for peasants. Yet, in year of 1400 to 1600, the sound of English underwent a substantial change known as Great Vowel Shift in Chaucer and Shakespeare period. For example, O moving up to oo. After Middle English was done, there are early modern English around 1500 that the printing was introduction in 1476. Sound change. Sound loss is sounds disappeared from the pronunciation of certain words, but resulting in the silent letters. Epenthesis involves the addition of a sound to the middle of a word. For example, spinal becomes spindle. Metathesis involves a reversal in position of two sounds in a word. For example, first became first. Prothesis involves the addition of a sound to the beginning of a word. For example, scola become escuela.
Syntactic change. Some noticeable differences between the structure of sentence in Old and Modern English involve word order. In Old English text, the structure of sentence is subject, verb, object. Order most common in Modern English, but it can also find a number of different orders that are no longer used. For example, there are some sentences that use the subject could follow the verb, or the object could be placed before the verb, or the object could be placed in the beginning of the sentence. In the use of negative also differs from the Modern English, since the sequence is no longer grammatical. A double negative construction was also possible. For example, you never have rather than you not have never. The most sweeping change in the form of English sentence was the loss of a large number of inflectional suffixes from many parts of speech. Nouns, adjectives, articles, and pronouns all had different inflectional forms according to their grammatical function in the sentence.
Okay, the next one we have semantic change. So, semantic change is a form of language change regarding the evolution of word usage, usually to the point that the modern meaning is radically different from the original usage. In diachronic or historical linguistics, semantic change is a change in one of the meaning of a word. Every word has a variety of senses and connotation, which can be added, removed, or altered over time, often to the extent that cognates across space and time have very different meanings. In semantic and historical linguistics, semantic change refers to any change in the meanings of a word over the course of time. So the example of semantic change is metaphor in poetry maybe. So metaphor is comparing something with something or someone with something or something with someone. Yeah, something like that. So the example of metaphor is the classroom was a zoo. It means that the classroom is very crowded, like a zoo, because there are many visitors that come to the zoo. Okay. The second example is she is a peacock. You know that peacock is a very beautiful bird that makes you falling in love with the peacock. It means that she is like, no, sorry, not using like because that's similar. I'm sorry, she is a peacock. Yeah, so she is a very beautiful woman that makes you falling in love with her. Yeah, something like that. Okay, then we have synchronic and diachronic. So synchronic linguistic, also known as descriptive linguistic, that is the study of language at any given point in time. Synchronic analyzes and describes how language is actually used by a group of people in a speech communities. Thus, involves analyzing grammar, classification, and arrangement of the feature of a language. Okay, then we have diachronic. Diachronic is the study of language through different periods in history. Diachronic have a main concerns. There are 1. Describing and accounting for observed change in particular language. 2. Reconstructing the prehistory of languages. 3. Describing the history of speech communities. And the last one is studying the history of words. So, the example of diachronic is like the history of English. Yeah, the history of English that explained before. So diachronic is like a timeline of the journey of English. Yeah, that's all.